Hey, everybody. This episode is actually a two-parter, and it's my conversation with Josh Dulberger. And it's fascinating because I'll just pretend I planned it. I had a conversation with him in June of 2025, and that's the first part of this episode. And then I had the second conversation after he had been in this new role for a while and had new ideas in January of 2026. So just recently, as I'm recording this. I'm going to pretend that that was on purpose and not because I just came to a dead stop in putting out these episodes because I am me and I got wound around my own axle and I procrastinated. No, instead, this was all on purpose. Anyway, putting these two conversations together turned out to be really interesting because you get to hear the same really smart, really informed person talking about AI, about product leaderships and career decisions at two very different moments in time, which I think is really cool. So, in this first part, in this first conversation from June of 2025, Josh talks about what it was like building AI products inside of Zoom, right as generative AI was starting to explode. And he describes the moment when the entire company suddenly realized AI might change everything, and his Slack basically exploded with questions and ideas and requests. And we're also talking about something that a lot of product leaders recognize, which is the huge part of senior product work isn't about building things. It's sorting through all the internal noise, like that crazy Slack channel, figuring out what actually matters, and turning a lot of excitement and confusion into a coherent product direction. At the time of the first conversation, Josh was also in the middle of figuring out what came next for him after helping launch some of Zoom's early AI products. Okay, so let's get started with the first half of that conversation right now, and I'll come back at the end and tell you what to expect in part two.
Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
Welcome. It is Corporate Underpants Live. Today is June 12th, 2025. It is 10 a.m. Pacific time here in the gorgeously overcast Seattle, Washington. Big shocking surprise that it's overcast here. And I'm Tamara Adlin, the creator of Corporate Underpants and your host. I'm so glad you could join us today. This is a doozy on top of a birthday cake, on top of an exploding surprise of goodness, because we're going to talk about so much stuff today. It's not even funny. And we're going to dive into the whole AI and product and AI, and we're going to wrap it all around with underpants and panty lines. And it's just going to be a festival of information. So, things top of my mind this week as we get rolling with this new live. I'm behind in posting a few of our previous episodes. I'm going to catch up as soon as I can, as soon as it's humanly possible. But even more top of mind these days for me is how bad really basic stuff that we live with every day still is from a user experience and design perspective. If any of you follow me on LinkedIn, and I hope you do, you will have seen that I posted an article recently called Vatomus and Loy, which stand for the vast tundra of mostly useless stuff and the land of important information, which is my experiences going to the wrong gate using a mobile boarding pass that should not have allowed me to go to the wrong gate, but it certainly did. And I tried to figure out why. So I'll post those eventually. But listen, we all get so wrapped around the really technical stuff and our titles and all of that craziness. Meanwhile, I would recommend keep your eyes open for stuff that doesn't make sense that's really on a fundamental level. And people, interestingly, on LinkedIn, a couple of engineering types criticized me for being wrong about being confused, which I think is freaking hilarious. But if I didn't speak English as a native language, if I had any vision impairment, even just being me, a senior technical person, I got confused. There's so much work still to be done. And I don't think AI is going to do it any better than we are. In fact, we're just going to get more confused. So keep your eye out. Send me examples of those. I'd love to see them. All right, let me get on to our guests for today because I'm just so excited talking about so much stuff today that has been bothering all of us. My guest today, let me introduce you. Bring him on so you can see his fabulous face, and I'll tell you who he is. This is Josh Dulberger, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, get this. Josh built and led Zoom's AI team during the pandemic. There's a job for you. Right before the explosion of generative AI and creating the company's first AI products, including Zoom AI Companion, which I now suddenly can't live without, even though it didn't exist not that long ago. Back in the early aughts, he started his career in strategy consulting just as SaaS was eating the world of business software. And Josh left that world to pursue a PhD in philosophy and cognitive science, as one does. By the way, my undergrad was partially in that. Found himself coding NLP models with neural networks into data science. Not even sure what that means. When that was a new hot role at many tech companies, and then went into product management, focusing on products where data and ML loomed large. And Josh recently went through a challenging job hunt, actually got a job in product in AI, and then had to join another company, product in AI. So currently, Josh is at Pax8 as GM of their AI product lab that aims to build AI agents for small and medium businesses. Josh.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for
Hello.
joining.
My pleasure.
And you are in Colorado?
Denver, Colorado. That's right.
Yeah. And we were just before we got started, I was trying to remember, my mind is like a steel sieve, why we met. And it's because I thought it was because of Never Search Alone, but it's not. It's because when I was advising an early stage startup, they were trying to hire a senior level product person. And I'm like, why don't you let me interview them? And you were absolutely the number one finalist. And then the whole company imploded
Yep,
while
sounds about right.
dragging you along. And somehow I got to keep you in the bargain as a colleague and contact. So that was good for me.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Tell us about okay, so there's a lot of people who are listening to this podcast millions of people listen to this podcast every single day in all countries and on Mars. Many of them are people who are in some kind of product related role who are in that messy middle of knowing that it's time to seek more seniority and knowing that our traditional tools, getting great at traditional tools isn't going to make you more senior in our field because there's different sets of problems that we have to handle as we become more senior. So tell us about your career history with respect to that. So you were at Zoom when AI hit. What was that like?
Yeah. So I joined Zoom in mid 2020. And so the pandemic was underway. And in fact, I went way back with the chief product officer from Zoom. We were at another startup earlier in my career where I led data science and he was director of product, a company called Blue Jeans.
Blue Jeans.
TLDR.
I know Blue
TLDR,
Jeans.
who made Blue Jeans lunch? Blue Jeans.
Where did the Blue
Right.
Jeans name come from?
Yeah, good question. There were billboards all over the Bay Area for a while. They were like, let's just plaster the place with billboards. But they did quite well in the early days. Their party trick was actually they could add a Skype call to a Cisco or Polycom room system in the days where that was you could not bring your own device to a conference. But so anyhow, it was a good party trick. And they built a business out of it. But all these companies actually spun out of Cisco's acquisition of WebEx in 2005, 6. And then all these guys left because they were like, this party's over. Cisco's never going to really take this seriously as Cisco's want. But they all started these like screen sharing and video apps. And one of them was Zoom, one of them was Blue Jeans. There were a bunch of other ones.
I worked on one that was way too early in 1999 called NetPodium. And that was a competitor of Placeware and
Okay.
WebEx way, way early.
Nice.
So, yeah.
That was when bandwidth was like probably the biggest challenge.
Oh, yeah, no,
anything
our
like
party trick. I like that word party trick. It's better. It's a clearer version of value proposition and differentiator. Our party trick was you could actually spin up a real audio stream to have live audio at the same time as a slideshow.
Right.
And interestingly, and then I was at a conference for Nielsen Norman Group, and somebody asked, Don Norman was on the stage, how do you know where software is going next? And he said it was a stupid question. I raised my hand and said, no, it's not a stupid question. You watch where porn is going. Because the people that were really interested in our software originally were porn. And I'm like, that's where the money is. That's where the future is.
I think there's a lot to that insight.
Yeah.
So what was your original question?
Oh,
I'm
just
an
that.
AI in the pandemic. So anyhow, this Oded Gal, the chief product officer of Zoom, called one day and he said, look, I know we've talked about you joining Zoom before and you don't want to move back to California because I was in California for a bunch of years during the Blue Jean days. And I made my way back to Colorado, love the mountains. That's another story. Didn't love the Bay Area for various reasons. And he was like, we're all remote now. So what do you say? And I said, okay. And so I joined and he offered me this role of, I think it was like a head of product for AI and data. And I pushed back on the AI part because AI to me was just marketing bullshit at that point in time. I had been
What
working
year
with
was this? What year?
2020.
Okay.
And I was like, could we just call it machine learning, call it what it is? We were going to build some natural language processing models, some NLP models, which I had experience in grad school with 10 years prior to that. So there was a lot of progress in the space, obviously. But my feeling was that still AI was not something to be taken seriously as such. And I studied philosophy of mind in grad school. I know a thing or two about neural nets and AI, and I thought about it with some amount of depth. But anyhow, I was like, okay, fine. They want the title to be thus and such. Let's just go with it. I'm not one to put up too much of a fight about the specifics of a title in that kind of situation. So I joined and there was no team. I had to build a team from scratch. They had a lot of engineers, a lot of what I would consider ML engineers, but they had a lot of engineers, about 90 people, which was by far the biggest engineering organization I'd ever worked. This is not Zoom at large. This is Zoom's AI ML engineering team. And they had built that team up over the course of the prior 2 years. So very quickly, they decided we need to get in this. And at the time, they were working on things like noise cancellation, just trying to make that better, or adaptability of their codecs, which are what sync up the video and audio. And they were also working on things like the artificial backgrounds. Like when I joined, that was actually the first thing that we shipped was the artificial backgrounds, which was exciting. But that was like the extent of it. But their thinking was that they had this just trove of recorded voice data that they wanted to figure out how to do something neat with. And so that's where the natural language processing came in. And their first stab at that was to go after a set of products that were built on the shoulders of tools like Gong and Chorus, which are these sales operations and analytics tools where you monitor the call and you can extract insights and take notes and publish things to your CRM. And so they had gone through maybe a 6 months of diligence on one of those companies and thinking about buying them. And then it landed on me in month one of, hey, should we buy this company or should we not buy this company? And I worked with the VP of AI and the engineering side, my counterpart over there, and he was like, the tech is just not there. So you can make a call on, is it worth it to buy it for like their market share and their Rolodex? They're buy their customers if you want, but that's a different equation. If we build this stuff today on a new stack, they built this 5 years ago. We just have ridiculous unfair advantages and can leapfrog them on the tech side. So then it just became a conversation of, do we just go on that front, or do we actually want to buy a company? And I like building things, so we built.
But it never occurred to me that I feel like dumb now, but it never occurred to me that Zoom had an insane amount of recorded voices
Yeah, and
and
obviously there are
recorded
all
natural
privacy
language.
considerations, and there's
Right.
who has the rights to it. But on a daily basis, they're recording like a ridiculous amount for their customers, and then their customers are hosting it. But if their customers want a transcript, that's data that we're storing, and they want a summary of that transcript, for example, that's something that we were positioned to provide. I think it's all pretty obvious now, but back in 2020, the ability to create a summary of a transcript with a machine model was very new. And that was one of the first things that an engineer on the team brought to me and said, hey, look, like I can actually do something like an autocomplete using a transformer for the summary of this call was, or the summary of this call in 100 words was versus a summary of this call in 1,000 words was. And I was like, oh, damn, let's ship that into a beta tomorrow. Let's find a subset of customers where we can permissions in place and do it. And so by a couple sprints later, that was in a product.
That must have seemed the demos of that must have seemed magical.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
I love
Well,
that because it's such a basic thing, but it really it's I love for me, product market fit is about finding a pain in the ass, and they're usually tucked in the nooks and crannies of our daily experiences, nooks and crannies of asses with corporate underpants, and a pain in the ass is a summary of and so
oh yeah,
did you
no, like the recordings and the transcripts, if you looked at the engagement rate on Zoom with who looked at the recordings and who looked at the transcripts, it was like couple zeros before you got to a number and then a percent. Like no one, like people would record it and maybe some of it was like cover your ass or be able to go back to it if you really had to, but no one did because it was just like, what are you going to do? Like command F through a transcript of an hour-long call and maybe you'll remember a word that someone said. It was completely unusable. And
wow.
so seeing that and then starting to see, oh wait, you can actually interact with these transcripts. So you can, it's an autocomplete. So not only will it complete a summary of this call is, but start any sentence and it will try to finish it. And you can specify how long it should take to finish it. So you could start having conversations all the way back then, before ChatGPT, before GPT-3, we had the ability to talk to a transcript. So
Okay,
when did,
so wait a second. You keep saying autocomplete, and for the technical
yeah, sure.
noobs, so you're saying that it really worked more like an autocomplete that we're familiar with, like in Google, than it worked like what we think of AI?
Yeah. So in fact, the way we think of AI, so I'll tweak the mental model a bit. Large language models more or less are doing an autocomplete exercise. They're figuring out the probability of the next string of words. So it's actually closer to the autocomplete in Google when you're typing than many people probably realize. That's the underlying technology. So and that's part of the reason that the large models are surprisingly good because no one ever thought, okay, if you can autocomplete the cat on the hat or something like that, because you've seen that specific sequence, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That's used a lot. So it makes sense that you could predict that last word. But as we've scaled these things up to millions and then billions of parameters, turns out they can do a lot more than just predict a very common sequence. And so that's where you get what people are calling like emergent behaviors of the large language models, where, when it was 10 million parameters, it was doing an autocomplete. When it's a billion parameters, it looks like it has complete thoughts, which is amazing, but it is all of that is derivative from various sources from human knowledge that's published on the internet. And it's basically taking a probabilistic distribution of what is to come next. Some people describe it as it's like the median person on the internet is talking to you because there's a way in which that's what the model's doing.
Oh my god! Okay, so that blew my mind, I just gotta tell you, and I love the simplicity of that, but it also now wraps my thoughts about AI into this blanket of I it's dumber than I thought. It looks way smarter than And it also is like the thing I complain about, not complain, I complain about data in general. But if AI is like something that is fundamentally looking for the probability of the next word or thought, then it's not the best thing to innovate.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think that's right. So, first of all, I should make a distinction. Most of what we're calling AI today are these large language models. There are
Okay.
other models. So, if you go get in a Waymo, that's a different kind of model that is actually perceiving the world in various ways. And so, there's different AI models out there that are doing some different things. But when you think of Anthropic's Claude or Google's Gemini or ChatGPT from OpenAI, those are large language models. And there is a way in which they're recycling human knowledge to us, but they can do it at a scale that makes things pretty interesting at times. So it's the ability to actually look across the entire damn internet, the entire history of human knowledge, and put together some coherent ideas, which, first of all, never would have guessed that 5 years ago. I would have been extremely skeptical. And that's where, again, the scale has produced these surprising behaviors. But being able to just assemble the history of human knowledge into some thoughts that are pertinent to a product turns out to be pretty powerful in some ways.
Yeah, my own point. It now I just want to go shut down this conversation and go play with ChatGPT, asking it for pains in the ass that nobody is fixing.
Absolutely. And I guess what I often compare it to is I spend a lot of time with Claude just because I like Claude's personality. But when Wikipedia first came out, it blew my mind. I was like that kind of attention nerd, maybe. But like you could navigate these articles of knowledge that were like, yeah, maybe they weren't perfectly accurate, but they were pretty damn good. People like to cast a lot of shade in the early days of Wikipedia. But just the hyperlinking and being able to like go deep on, you could start on an article about the Soviets and go into Stalin and go into the history of the world really quickly. And you'd wind up in Plato and just being able to trace those threads through hyperlinks, OMG, was really compelling. And now I could spend hours just like navigating the course of human knowledge with Claude. And I find it extremely compelling. And yeah, I think there are times where it can be hard to get truly novel insights about things. But again, recombining human knowledge, like there's a lot of richness there.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
such
would not sell that too short about whether that could give you insights and help you think about things and apply 20 different frameworks in a very interactive way. But humans in the loop, especially humans that have experience with the world or experience with products and identifying problems, that's where it becomes super powerful because it can just arm you with so much background knowledge. There are times where, like, I was putting together a VC pitch for, we didn't talk about this, but the startup I was at 6 months ago, and just the ability to go deep on some of these areas. Like I was having fun with it, but did it save me time? I don't know. Maybe at the end it may have cost me more time, but that was mostly because the incremental value of exploring a topic with Claude was just massive. If I just ask it one more question, I get like a whole like world of insights to fold into this analysis for the PC as well, really for myself because I was working at that point. But you get the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me, the observation that I have. It's been life-changing for me because I have this align before design stuff that I'm working on, which is I have dozens of drafts of things everywhere. And then when I had all those drafts, I would feel like I had to go back and look at them, but then I would get overwhelmed by that, so I would start a new one. And then when I created this project in ChatGPT, was able to take all of those and sanitize and make them sane for me. But then it also became part of the problem very quickly because it generated multiple versions of multiple things in multiple ways.
Yeah.
And so it's just this.
What's your stopping function? Like when you,
Yeah, a friend of mine, a brilliant painter, Ida, she was like, I need somebody standing next to me with a 2x4 to hit me over the head to stop. So I stopped painting over paintings. Yeah.
and I use it for that too. Like I will take two different paths down something and then I'll ask it to evaluate or reconcile or best ideas from both. And it is a great tool for me, at least, to iterate. And then, yeah, I have to figure out when I think that's good enough. And I also get to a point oftenly where it's actually getting worse. I've
Right.
noticed that too. And I'm like, actually, this is shittier than the last one you gave me. Let's go back.
Okay, so let's go back to I want to pull back to what it's like to be in an organization when all of this chaos hits, right? When you're at Zoom and you're brought in and AI is in your title, and then one of the first things that gets brought to you doesn't I don't think that anybody would have thought it's the sexiest thing in the world. It was just summarize the freaking meeting, right? And I can't imagine that's what senior executives would have thought would have been a cool first use. What was that? Was it did you get that kind of pushback? Was there expectations that you had to manage? What tell
There,
it do you
I think
remember?
Zoom's culture is pretty tech progressive. So people were excited when we explained some of these things, like more excited than maybe other places. But it wasn't about features. It was certainly about, okay, how can we start packaging products? So Zoom was going through, at that point, a post-pandemic stagnation. So they captured the market, became a household name, and they were finding it very hard to grow. And this did appear to be an avenue of growth for them where they could add additional value and potentially get into other parts of the business. So there was a lot of excitement to the point where, especially about a year in when GPT-3, ChatGPT, GPT-3 is the model that was underneath the first ChatGPT. So when those things came out, I think it was like late 2021, forgetting if it's 2021 or 2022. The entire organization like blew up my Slack. I mean, we use this product, but my chat the next day was like, what the fuck are we actually doing? And then for the following year, my inbound on a daily basis was, yeah, I was wanting to build AI tools to help me manage my inbound because you have to go look up who these people are, look at like Workday, look at the directory. What is your point of interest? Because I get these decontextualized questions and you're just like, where do I begin? And I didn't have a language model then to say, okay, here's my AI strategy dossier that's 20 pages, package that to answer this question for this sales, which I would totally do today. And then I would put some polish on it and hit send. Then I would just be like, I don't have to figure out a conversation. I have to schedule a call. What do I? So anyhow, it did go from like features to we want products that we can charge for very quickly. And then it took a swing back to actually, we need to give this away to protect the platform because Microsoft and others are going to give this stuff away. And the strategy turned over and inside out a few times over in the couple of years that I was there.
So I want to come back and put a little
Sure.
exclamation point on the fact that a huge part of your job for a while was wrangling this chaotic rodeo of people who were in your grill asking for features, wanting your attention, wanting to insist that their ideas were great, wanting to complain about things.
Oh, yeah.
Your job as a senior leader in an innovative, groundbreaking technology was to answer a bunch of fucking emails.
Yeah. More often chat messages the way we work, but yeah, more like same difference.
But that's a whole other thing, and I don't think people think about that enough. Like, you had to dance between so many raindrops just in answering those chats, and the politics inherent in the chats. You even said that you had to look up who some of these people were and whether this was coming from sales or whatever. And it sounds like now you manage that with AI.
It helps, but I think it's still like you have to have the right mindset and be a communicator of sorts, and also be a product manager in that you want to absorb as much as possible. You want to get the feedback. You don't want to tell everyone to screw off. Like you want to understand where they're coming from and you want to pick up the signals, but there's a lot of noise and there are a lot of people who just want to make their number or something, or are complaining because they were embarrassed in a demo or something, right? So there's lots of different interests to navigate. And there's recency bias. Oh, I just got off the call with a customer who's using this other product and they hate
Yeah.
our product and I was embarrassed. Blah, blah, blah. So that you have to fish through all of that to get to where are the insights that I need to drive home into the product? Which ones are bigger than a breadbasket and maybe need some actual planning around that's a quarterly planning cycle? Which ones are, oh, wow, that's a problem. That's a bug that we have to go fix like next sprint, or which is just like a feature that maybe is actually pretty cheap, but unlocks a whole lot of value. And so I definitely took the product approach there, but there was a lot of communicating and applying pressure, pushing back in some areas, inviting more feedback in other areas, and trying to strike that balance.
I think that is a huge. I think about how much time you must have had to spend doing that. And I think a lot of us, as we get more senior in an org, sort of push that aside or poo it. Oh, yeah, I had to deal with all this. The number of hours in your day that you had to deal with essentially what was wrangling politics and emotions and ideas and people going squirrel and sparkly objects and at different levels of the organization. How did you learn how to do that? Where do you think that comes from for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I've been in this career-ish for long enough that I developed it somewhat by experiencing it. And there's lots of literature on how to manage products and how to avoid certain pitfalls, anti-patterns. So I think all of that has kind of seeped in over time. I think I'm also just very much a pragmatist by nature and someone who likes to solve problems. And I wouldn't say I'm a prickly person, but I certainly have some backbone and a perspective that I bring to the conversation. And if anything, product management and being in the corporate world or even the world of startups, I've softened a lot of it. So I come from like analytic philosophy where it's all about, I can win an argument. Like there's not really a question about
That's not a
when
problem.
I am trained to win arguments. And most of my professional career has been, okay, how do we back off that and really not care about the argument so much as getting to the knowledge? That's like what the philosopher would say is really it's in service of getting to the truth of the matter. And I think that's really informed my approach of, okay, I can soften a lot of my edges. I still am happy to push back, and that's in my nature, but I want to get to the bottom of something. I want to solve the problem. I want to understand more. And I think I infuse that with my approach. But I'll also say that at times it's extremely challenging. Like I skew introverted, by which I mean it's not energizing for me to talk to people. Like it makes me tired. And so there are definitely times where I have weeks where I'm just like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And in fact, when I had my sabbatical in Spain last year, I don't speak Spanish. I tried to learn Spanish and people asked me how that was. And one of the things that I often say to them is that it was a very introspective year, which I very much enjoyed. I didn't talk a lot to people. That was fine.
That was fine. Just move to another country where we don't. It makes me think of the whole the trees are strong because they bend, or the whole like karate and martial arts philosophy that you get to a point where the energy that's coming at you is not something that you put up a strong front against. Is that you figure out how to move out of the way, or how to where you don't have to prove anymore that you're smart or that your ideas are valid, but it takes this moment of ego switch, I think,
Yes, it does.
where you realize, okay, hold on. Nobody in here does actually know more than I do about this topic. And maybe there's nothing that they could say or bluster about or threaten that really actually is going to be life threatening or job threatening to me. So maybe I can just watch them go by and react to them. It's a weird moment, though, where it is a softening, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It reminds me actually when I was as an undergrad, I had to defend a senior thesis and going to the defense. I wasn't nervous, but I was a little on edge. And my mother got on the phone with me and she was like, more than anyone else in the room about this topic. You just spent a year researching this and writing this. And yeah, they're academics and they've been in this game for a while and they're going to probably ask you some hard questions, but ultimately you're going to know more than they know about it. So go in
And
with
their
that.
questions, as often as not, are about issues they have with each other and wanting to
Oh,
look smart
absolutely.
with each other. So
It's an axe to grind as much as anything. And so I think going into professional settings and being able to muster that confidence that you've probably thought about what you're about to talk about more than anyone else, and putting that as positioning for you to also hear feedback that will be constructive, that you don't have to say they're undermining me or they're fighting me or they think they know more than actually trying to hear it and engage with it because you are in such a strong position just makes for a productive outcome. And I think people perceive that pretty quickly in other people
yeah,
and it changes the tone.
there's huge power in being the one willing to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I can get back to you next Thursday.
Yes.
It's saying I'm not playing. I'm not going to play the underlying game that's in this question. I'm going to take it at face value as a real question about a real topic. And it's taking it seriously. It's a strange kind of paradigm shift
Absolutely.
where you're playing, you're not playing politics, but you actually are managing politics by taking people seriously in a way that they may not expect to be.
Yeah, and I think it's when you go out of selling mode in some derogatory way, where you feel like you have to paper over everything you don't know or fill in or just present this polished facade. And a lot of people appreciate when you just say, look, I can take an educated guess here. I can tell you if I'm a betting person, like I can tell you what my bet is, but let me follow up and let me talk to my team and get back to you and we'll have a more thorough answer. It's very rare and you'd have to be foolish to not appreciate when someone comes to you with that level of honesty.
Which makes me think, so what I've been thinking, you and I have been talking for a while about this, about my course and AI and how to position all this stuff. And one of the things that's interesting is there's certain things, for me anyway, that AI is never going to be able to do. And one of those things is align stakeholders on things, because it's not about the right or wrong answer or the pure knowledge ever, but also that it's not like AI by itself would never be able to completely take over for you from you in answering those chats. Would it?
Yeah, I'm like, are you asking the right person this? I am not, I don't feel strongly positioned to say never about these things, but I would say I think it's a long road before it does a really good job. I do think that even in my case, if I have a bunch, I use Notion a lot these days and I document a lot of my thoughts using the LMs. I have pretty well elaborated positions, sometimes in disagreement with each other, but I have pretty well elaborated thoughts there. If someone else wants to interrogate that, they can. They could ask questions of that document. And I think that they would get a pretty good
Okay, that's
guide.
fine. See, they could interrogate the thoughts, but the kinds of chats that come in that say, we need feature X
Yeah.
may or may not be addressable and may or maybe should or should not be addressable by the thoughts you've already had.
I think it's a pretty long road before all of that gets agentified or automated in some sense. There's a distinction there, but we can get into that only if it's interesting. I do think that you're going to have some people involved in that process for sure. But I think that it could be so much more efficient. I'll
Yeah.
give you another example. The little startup I was at, which was acquired and led to me joining a new company recently to lead their labs effort. We would have customer calls. I had this elaborate set of features we were building to build AI for corporate accountants so that they could have a modern piece of software. And I could be on a call and just get like barraged in the early days, like 6 weeks into the job, I'd get barraged by subject matter experts on all the things that we had to do. And I didn't even understand half the jargon that they were using. And I would ask questions and try to grab onto something that was like flying by and interrogate it some. But I was able to do a lot with the LLMs after those calls with those transcripts and map it to my ideas, parse it and group it and understand it in ways that might have taken me 6 months of onboarding to really like understand. And then I could trace that into the roadmap that we had built out or features that we were planning. And so I guess I would say there's a ton of value to harvest in even the current crop of tools without our jobs going away. But it does require like the right person who's critically engaging with it and not just at face value.
Which is and the question that everybody has right now in our field is in such chaos, and we're in this strange bubble of not strange, it's a typical bubble of arguing with each other on LinkedIn about what is and what isn't, and news articles about our jobs going away. And I don't know that we can predict all of this right now, but it's
Right.
just so interesting to hear from you you've been immersed in it and you're so much more fluent in it than pretty much anyone on this listening to this. And so I think there's a sort of a desperate need to hear where should we be focused? Not that it's your job to know that exactly.
Yeah. I am not seeing right now on the ground, there's not a dramatic shift in the day to day of what people expect and what people are doing as far as product management, design, engineering, like the trio of building a product. I'm not seeing massive changes. I'm seeing people tinkering around the edges and doing their jobs more efficiently and maybe being able to do more than they used to be able to do. And there could be some displacement or just lack of need to hire more people on the team because we're able to do more. So I think there's some of that. I see pressure on more junior people because I think there is just, and with the tooling right now, there's immense value. If you know what a good product looks like, not even like a product that I'm shipping, but if you know what like a good work output looks like, I think the LMs and the AI tools today you can get there quickly. You can make it even better than you used to make it because it used to be like, okay, I'm on a timeline. What can I do in a week here? What can I do in a day? You can do more now. I think that's true. But if you're a junior person and you don't know exactly, you're not battle tested and you don't know what like a great PRD looks like, it's going to be a little harder to get there, I think, even using a tool. So I see the pressure on, and same thing with software engineers and designers, I think. So I see the pressure on more junior people. And I think we need to be thinking about, okay, how do we get to experienced people if we don't cultivate junior people? So I do think there's like a problem there.
Oh, that's a good
Um,
question. Oh my
yeah,
God. I didn't even think of that. How do we get to senior people if we don't cultivate? Oh my God. Now you've just worried me on a whole other level.
right. So I think we're going to have to be creative in thinking about how we're investing in the future. And companies, I think, are being a little short-sighted now around that. But when I think about what I'm about to see in the team I'm building, I do expect more blurring of distinction. So, like, for example, I'm sure folks are familiar with products like V0, where a product manager, an engineer, designer can actually go in and do a quick prototype of code that kind of vibe code an app a website or something, but it's fairly robust and interactive and can play around. And just the speed with which you can do that, you can just like plain English and you get like an app in a few minutes is pretty impressive. And it means that you can just like rapidly iterate and kick around ideas. And it's the new slideware, but it's much more useful and it might even be reusable in a production environment. So now all of a sudden your slideware is like closer to a real product or can inform what a developer might go and ship. So the lines I think will blur between design and product and engineering, whereas more of those implementation details potentially could be carried by an AI agent, a model. You have to step up and think, okay, what am I going to think about now? Or what are the problems I'm solving? Is it like an architectural challenge if I'm an engineer? Is it product strategy? And I think people will start walking into each other's areas a little bit more. My feeling there is still that the people who are really good at these jobs are the ones who are most empowered. So if I go ahead and don't have a UX person on a team, I am going to suffer because as a product manager, like I have some UX chops and some intuitions, but they're more like a junior level UX researcher or UX designer. And as a result, I think I'm going to do a job that like a junior person would do. And those are the people who are being displaced.
So Dan, and I want to invite anybody listening to put in some comments or questions. Dan says we can automate away the entry level on ramp as we know it today, but we cannot automate away attrition and mortality. Although that got serious fast.
Fair enough.
So what we need is to invent the next generation of the on ramp.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. And I don't think people are there yet in thinking about that investment. Now, I think there are two sides of this initially. One is I do think that there are talented, bright kids coming out of undergraduate or what have you, who are going to figure out a way to get to that mid-level, maybe using the current tools, maybe it's side projects. I think it's likely that we're going to see a boom of small businesses and entrepreneurship. So I think I see avenues that maybe are just less traditional. So it might not be that you go to one of the best schools and then you land yourself at a hyperscaler, or if not a hyperscaler, a really interesting, big pre-IPO company. It might be that you work for a friend of the family or work for someone in the family and you figure out how to bring technology into those places that those people just aren't going to do. So I do think there are going to be other paths that people take to gaining the right level of experience to being useful, productive members of society.
Okay, so that actually is a good segue to what I want to
Yeah,
talk about
sure.
next, which is empirically, you are at a great spot in any career, right at the right moment, right? So you were at Zoom, early days of AI. You spoke the language enough to even be able to say it's not AI, it's ML, to look at early prototypes of things like meeting summaries. And then you exited Zoom, and you can say how that happened or not, and then continued in your career. And I want to talk about how you ended up where you are today, which is like the dream job for a lot of people. The dream job for a lot of people would be being in charge of an innovation lab, right? What that even means, a funded innovation lab inside of a company, what that even means, most people don't know. And you're like about to start hiring people and what you're looking for and stuff. So let's bring us up to speed on that, because it
Sure.
was during that time after Zoom that I met you.
That's
And
right.
so tell us a little bit about what happened.
That we re-met
No, we remet. We read.
after,
Right, right.
after the first conversation that we had years ago. So
All right. So the first conversation we had years ago, it was a company that was considering you as a product lead.
yes,
And one of the things we mentioned to people on here is that often job descriptions or trying to hire a senior person is really trying to solve an argument that's happening in a leadership team. It's not like this pure, oh, we need product leadership. It's more like I'm arguing with Bob and we need somebody to break the tie. And sometimes what happens is what happened with you, which is even the act of trying to hire that person explodes the issue into people's faces. And I think that happened.
yep, yep. Okay, so rewind the tape back to Zoom. I joined Zoom knowing that my tenure had a pretty hard cap on it because I have a daughter now. She's about to turn 7. When she was born, my wife and I were thinking through things that we wanted to do in raising a child. But one of the things that loomed large was my wife is from Spain. She's from Catalonia. And we wanted to figure out how's this kid going to speak not just Spanish, but Catalan, and what's her exposure going to be to Spanish and Catalan culture. And in exploring that, we made a plan, a financial plan, really, in the end, to spend a year in Spain while she was young. just thinking, okay, before she's older and has her friend group and we're going to disrupt her life, let's try to go spend some time over there, immerse her in the languages and the family and the culture. And so then we set on that path back in 2018. And so when I took the role at Zoom, I actually let Odette know. I let the chief product officer know that the clock was ticking, that I could push back a little bit that trip to Spain, but not a lot. And we did push back a little bit so that we did kindergarten and pre-K over there. But we had a plan early on that we were going to need to either replace me or figure out some way for me to work from Spain. Through the course of working at Zoom and all of the things that happened, I think the role went from being like maybe an 8 or a 9 to an 11 in terms of the attention and the magnitude and the scope. So as the end grew near, it became pretty clear to me. And I was telling all of them, I was like, look, I'm leaving in 6 months, in 3 months, in 6 weeks. I was like, we need a plan. We need a plan. And there was a lot of misalignment and a lot of foot dragging around what to do about this problem before I left. Ultimately, we wound up recruiting a pretty great researcher from Microsoft AI who came in and had built a big team at Microsoft, and it was like a 30-year veteran. And he took like half of my role, and the other half we brought in like a product person. But they punted on it and they disagreed about it so much that I wound up working from Spain for another five or so months that I wasn't planning to. And largely, I mean, I wanted to unplug in Spain and enjoy the sabbatical, but also managing a team. We had engineers in China, in India, in California. There was a lot. And you heard about my inbound every morning where I'd have hundreds of messages. The time difference in Spain was pretty damaging to being able to play that role anymore. So I played a supporting role for a few months and tried to get them into a transition. And then I moved up to the mountains, was on Starlink. No thanks to Elon, but that was all we could get. Every 6 minutes, my internet went out for about 90 seconds. And so that really just forced the issue.
Well, at
So
least it
I
was reliable every 6 minutes for 90
oh, the
seconds.
satellites, it was pretty reliable, but it was a little bit dependent on weather and but the satellites pretty much reoriented and we found internet again after about 90 seconds. But doing a video call, like especially at a professional setting, was like almost completely.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So then towards the end of that sabbatical, so I enjoyed the mountains and I did a lot of climbing and skiing and mountain biking and just enjoying Spanish culture and epic lunches and siestas once in a while. And then towards the end of that, I was like, oh shit, the whole market for tech workers is under a lot of pressure. I better start thinking about what I'm going to do next because I had a good compensation package at Zoom, but it wasn't career ending.
Right.
And so that's when I reconnect. I was like, okay, who do I reach out to? Let me start this process. And I am an introvert, so I would say that was not easy for me, but you were one of the people and I was like, oh, Tamara knows like somebody or has an idea about what to do. So that's when I reached out to you along with another dozen people or so.
Yep. And then I think I was heavy duty into Never Search Alone by that point. So probably
Yes.
recommended that pretty hardcore, which is good. So then you ended up, and I want to fast forward here a little bit because you ended up at a company that you stayed with for a little while.
Yep.
And then that didn't work out. And now you and there's probably stories there, but now you ended up here where you are today. And you got hired in this sort of ridiculously interesting role. And how did you find it? How did that happen? What is
Yeah.
it?
So last summer in my little like outreach tour, dusting off people I hadn't talked to in a while, I talked to, again, maybe a dozen people or so. One of the people I reached out to had hired me at a startup. I want to say around the time where you and I first met. So I went to Pi Insurance, which is an insurtech startup in Denver, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And she was chief product officer and brought me in basically the first product hire. So I reached out to her and we've been in touch over the years. We get drinks every once in a while and have coffee. She's just fantastic. And I think our personalities fit well. So she was one of the people I reached out to. And she was like, I don't really have anything right now, but I am the chief product officer of this company, Pax8. It's a long story as to what Pax8 does. We can get into that. But our CEO has funded and sold or exited a few companies. And he's a really interesting guy. He's heavy into AI and he's definitely a vision caster. Why don't you talk to him and see if you guys get along? I think you might. He is pretty interesting. And so when I got back to Denver from Spain, I went and had coffee with him, Scott Chasen. And he's a really interesting guy, super compelling, definitely checks a lot of CEO boxes of being that kind of charismatic leader, but also is pretty deep into technology. And he was a CTO before he became CEO. So we had
Well,
coffee.
and he's sold a couple companies, by the way. That makes him pre-disastered in my lingo, which means that he's not just some shiny kid getting money thrown at his face,
Right.
for being shiny.
He's more of a veteran. Like I don't know, he's not a lot older than I am, but he's probably 10 years older than I am or so. So yeah, really interesting guy. We had a good conversation. We were supposed to have coffee for an hour. I think we spent like a whole afternoon chatting. And we had some ideas about how we might work together. But at that point, I was actually more interested in going to a really early stage startup
Mhm.
and anything that was like pre-IPO momentum. And so I was like, I have these other things out there. And I think you and I were talking about some of those opportunities. And I decided I want to go for this small team. So I joined like a 5-person team that was trying to wrangle LLMs into doing taxes. And I was like, this is going to be fun. I wanted something smaller, a palate cleanser, if you will, after Zoom's like thousands of people pinging me every day. I was like, maximum 5 people will ping me at any.
There only are 5 people.
I just felt like that was what I wanted. And so that's the direction I took. And then over the months, I went through ebbs and flows. And ultimately, what happened was like really nothing especially catastrophic. It was just the company had a good proof of concept and we got acquired. And through the acquisition, I had a realization that I didn't really want to be part of a medium-sized startup, acquired us and be mid-level at this company. Like, I like playing that very big fish in small pond role of helping to define the culture. But now we were in this like Series C startup and it was a few hundred people and I was inevitably going to be lost in the mix. And so I took my head out and started reaching out to some folks and I probably pinged you at that time. And I pinged Scott at that time and he was like, let's meet tomorrow. And like the first time last summer, it took him like 6 weeks to make a calendar spot for me. He's, let's meet tomorrow. I got all kinds of ideas. So we went and he pitched me pretty hard on this idea of starting labs. He really felt that he wanted to fund an innovation center that could move quickly, catch waves, so to speak, in a very new dynamic world that we're in. And he felt that I might be the right person to lead that effort. And
Oh
so
my
then it became
god. That's insane. That's okay. I don't even know what I'm like without an analogy, without a metaphor, because it's so great. And so what happened from there? Like it wasn't a role that existed, but
well,
he
so
had decided that he wanted to put money into it, which is
right,
critical because
right.
sometimes people have these ideas and they're like, oh, but if it's not funded, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so that was one. So I had a couple of questions. One was, am I going to come in and fight for the budget or is that established in some capacity? I'm happy to put up a fight or refine the view, but I wanted to know that this was real and I wasn't going to come in and to fight for a year to have any headcount, to have anybody working on anything, simply because I want to build things. I don't want to just play the political game. I'm happy to play the political game and crunch numbers, but I wanted to get to work building something. But the other part of it is it's easy now to say, oh, it was great. Who gets to run a lab? But I was a little worried that I was going to be like his skunk works hot rod shop, where it was going to be like anything that the product management team says, actually, we're not going to do that anytime soon for a variety of reasons. That's not a priority. He would come over to me and be like, hey, let's work on the hot rod, the garage down the street because his family didn't want his hot rod in his garage or something like whatever, pick your metaphor. So I really wanted to kick the tires on, torture the metaphor a little. I really wanted to explore like whether I was going to turn into that, like just like skunk works kind of thing that was following his druthers and didn't really have a lot of continuity or steering and would be almost intrinsically subject to a lot of things that I think you worry about in terms of like, he's got a great idea. Let's drop everything and just go after that for a week. But I think through the course of about a month of conversations where I was taking the idea seriously and also pushing back and asking lots of questions, it became clear that that he was maybe a little bit too busy and really wanted to entrust this to someone. If it was going to be someone's hot rod shop, it was going to be my hot rod shop. And I have a product background and I like to build things, but also I respect engineers' time and content and understand that sometimes you want to get things over the line and you want to have like good reasons to change tax, so to speak. So I felt pretty good about that. And I also felt pretty good that I was going to get to recruit the team directly and run the show. So yeah, so I don't know. I feel pretty fortunate that it all worked out. I'm still after the
What's your
exercises.
job? What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to produce?
Yeah. So a little bit about Pax8. Pax8 is a marketplace today for MSPs, which are essentially like the IT outsourcing shops, is one way to think about it. Most companies, especially smaller companies, small and medium sized businesses, think like fewer than 1,000 people, probably don't have dedicated IT or much for dedicated IT. So you join a company, I join a company, they provision a laptop, they make sure all the software is on there, they make sure that you have the right permissions. So you go into Workday, you can see some things, can't see other things. It's all set up. These managed service providers, MSPs, take care of a lot of that. They also take care of things like maybe your firewalls and some of your security protocols, your VPNs, like whatever it is. And Pax8 is like their clickety marketplace. You could think like Amazon Marketplace or you could App Store, where they can go and just say, okay, it's a Microsoft shop. Let's like pick out the Microsoft things that this machine gets, and automatically ish, you get subscribed, your subscription counts go up, you get bumped to the next tier, billing is recurring. Pax8 takes all of that, so it's all in one place, and the MSP doesn't have to go to 32 different vendors and manage it at each one, and basically use Google as like their hub for finding a new service. So that's what Pax8 does. The lab is basically it's, I think, a twofold mission. One is to just catch waves. So it's to be a smaller, nimbler team outside of the tech stack that was built 10 years ago, outside of a 200-person organization with all kinds of security protocols and trust and safety and all that, to be able to rapidly prototype and show that the feasibility, technical feasibility to build a new thing that we want to build, and that there's some kind of market validation. So just think prototyping and beta testing and making sure that this is a good idea to go invest in for a full product. So that's one. It's just like the modus operandi is to be able to move quickly, prototype, get the feedback, and validate the core notion of the product. More specifically, though, so that's like kind of general, like how we operate. More specifically, though, we're going after building AI agents for these MSPs to roll out to SMBs. So a lot of
You need
I know.
you need more
Acronyms
letters.
too. I'm sorry. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'll try to make it real without the acronyms. The nature of the game, if you're a small business, I think, is just constraints and operating within constraints. Like you're never going to have the world we live in, right? That's part of being human. But when you're an SMB, you just like very rarely have resources to hire a finance manager, a marketer, like what have you, let alone people who maybe are core to your business. But the peripherals are often like a gate. And there's a step function in terms of like how much revenue you take in and what you can afford as far as those roles go. And the idea here is that we could actually help these IT outsourcing shops build some AI agents that do some of these things. So maybe they like open an email and enter something into a spreadsheet and book an appointment. There are automation tools that do that, but a lot of that, believe it or not, probably believe it, is a person who's doing that, or someone's doing the bookkeeping. Maybe it's like a 3 days a week kind of job. And this person would like to retire because, she's probably, I'll go go gendered on this, but I think the stereotype would be like, this person might be like the business owner's aunt or something who's helping out and would like to retire someday. And you can't afford like a full-time person to replace that person. And so the idea is, okay, which of these workflows are ripe for some automation and are just a bit painful, a bit rote, and we can actually help someone roll that out to improve it.
I love this because it's this super sexy job from a job perspective, but it's handling tiny pain in the ass pieces on a sort of a B2B scale. And a lot of people are like, think of startups or innovation as like tackling these giant problems that are going straight to consumers and changing behavior like Facebook or whatever. But the really interesting piece and the most successful pieces are what look like unsexy problems from the outside that are pain in the ass for a business, which is operating on the bottom line. So let me ask you this, because we're coming down to the last few minutes. We may go a few minutes over here. My question is, people who are listening this, like me, like, fuck it, I want to work for you. What are you looking for? So many people are like out there reading about AI, or they're taking some kind of certification course, or like you went back to got a PhD, which I don't think I'd recommend to everybody. But what are you looking for when you look for people to work on this stuff with you and for you? How do you look for them?
Yeah, so I'm just starting to spin up job descriptions, but part of it is just the team composition. So I want some people who have engineering experience or engineers, and there's going to be like a typical mix of front end and back end. And then I'm looking for some designers and some product folks. If you click into those roles, I'm looking for folks who, I feel like at this point, most people in the field are exposed to AI tools, but I want people who are experimenting with different tools and learning about the new experiences associated with those, whether that's Claude, whether that's Cursor, whether it's V0. So I think there is a new crop of tools, and I want people to at least be expressing curiosity about how those tools will change the way they work, make them more efficient. They could even hate them to some extent, but I want the openness to exploring how work looks like with
That makes me
those.
think of a new subcategory of people's portfolios, which would be experiments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
they don't have to be successful. They don't have to be like, and they don't even have to have a happy ending, but you
Yep.
want to see
And
people.
and even being critical of them and having an opinion of about some of their deficits can be extremely powerful in this kind of position where we're trying to solve for some of those problems. So I want people who aren't necessarily just AI pilled and completely in the Kool-Aid, but I want people who are curious about it and aren't, oh, I'm gonna completely go dark on this new generation of tools at our disposal. And I want people who are excited about the mission and the space. And we're gonna build prototypes and some of them are gonna fail. And I'm okay with that. Like I've worked with a lot of great people over the years, but the willingness to take risks and fail is not something everyone has for various reasons. And so I want people who are ready to be part of this culture that will move quickly, but also has a stomach for pulling the plug on something because it didn't hit the mark for some reason.
So how do you find that? You ask that? We're seriously going to go a few minutes over here because now we're
Okay.
getting into some meeting
Sure.
stuff, which is
Sure.
like, what do we do with ourselves if we're in the messy middle? We don't have a job and we're trying to figure out where to put our attention. So one of the things that we just talked about was I've just decided to invent a subcategory in portfolios that is my experiments. And you've said my experiments don't have to be successful. They don't even have to be that interesting. They could be a great example of why to give something up. They could be your failure with a tool, but the fact that
Yep.
they exist is
I
is really
love, I really do love that. And I think a lot of people are reticent about failure. So I think showing that you have the stomach for it and that's something you can work with and you can still learn something and figure out what the pivot is, or even if it's just, hey, this generation of tools lacks these things, but when they're solved, I could see the potential, whatever it is. I think that's pretty critical. I think the other area is for me personally, like I want people who are interested in the pain points of small businesses and can help think about, okay, how do we make this a little less painful? And there is a flip side. So I was kind of talking about the helping a business that is already established grow, but there is this idea that maybe a one or two person startup can do a lot more now. There's this idea of a one person unicorn. And I think thinking through, okay, what are the tools that person would need? Because they're not going to be an expert in finance. They're not going to be a CFO. They're not going to be a chief marketing officer and help them explore it.